is not just simply by educating people, educating Russians in Russia, but encouraging international connections. And that there is certainly opportunities to encourage both people to come into Russia as well as to have more students study outside of Russia to build that kind of cross-fertilization. I think there are many examples across the globe of programs that we could look at. Singapore has put a huge amount of effort into educating entrepreneurs at almost every level of society. The Innovar program, which Patricia was responsible for in Brazil, had basically a whole set of issues to educate both CEOs about how to get venture funding and what they need to do to be at a level of sophistication, as well as investors and institutions about how this process works. Another interesting example is Startup Chile, a program which essentially encourages foreign entrepreneurs to come to Chile in exchange for visas and funding, and with the hope that they are going to mingle with Chilean entrepreneurs and that they'll be learning from the interactions between the foreign and the Chilean entrepreneurs. Another area had to do with government. And again, there seemed to be a lot of opportunities for short-term gains. I'll just talk about a couple of ideas that came up and we wanted to highlight. One of them had to do with trying to remove barriers. Certainly one of the points that we heard from many of the entrepreneurs and venture capitalists we talked about were some of the challenges around visa issues and customs issues and the way that this could serve as a barrier to entrepreneurs. In a sense that this would be, particularly today as innovation markets become more global, that this is an area where there could be a lot done to improve the process. Again, I think there's a lot of opportunities. There's already some efforts along these lines, but much more that could be done to expose the technologies that are developed into Russia to the global market and to enhance interconnections that are there. In the longer term, I think there are some opportunities in terms of trying to create greater coordination across agencies. And I think that one can think about a number of areas from tax policy to intellectual property and the like, where even though there's been progress made in recent years, there's still further that could be done to make these policies more friendly to entrepreneurs. Again, I think we can find a number of examples of countries that have done efforts along these lines. We've seen countries which have spent a lot of time evaluating and fine-tuning their programs, using matching funds as a requirement. We've seen examples of countries which have tried to centralize and coordinate the efforts, whether formally or by reliance on moral suasion, to make these efforts come together. A third area that we talked about was about capital. And here we had several areas that we thought were worth highlighting. Certainly one of these things was in terms of trying to get better data. As we talked about at the beginning, the availability of information around the Russian venture market is not as high as perhaps should be. And there's a lot of stuff that within the US or Europe one can know about the market, or even China, one can know about the market, but just simply very difficult to get information on here. And that trying to create more transparency about the market is actually important in terms of trying to get foreign investors comfortable with investing here and making more of a commitment to the Russian market. Another area that very much seemed to be ripe for doing had to do with encouraging outreach to foreign general partners, the people running venture funds, as well as limited partners. Well, certainly there have been a number of efforts done to date, in which I'm sure our very distinguished panelists will discuss. I think that more things can be done. That's certainly one of the things that struck us as we talked to people in Silicon Valley, is that there's still a lot of misconceptions about the Russian market that is out there. Another area that we could sort of think about in the longer term is in terms of trying to create some of the preconditions that are conducive to an effective market. One of these is essentially an exchange where it's easier for companies to go, which are backed by venture investors, to go public. For instance, the Chinese government has spent a lot of time creating a very high-quality secondary market called Chinext, which essentially has become a magnet for venture capitalists wanting to take companies public. Another area is in terms of trying to educate and encourage local institutional investors, such as pension funds, and to try to encourage them to know about venture capital and to invest in venture capital funds. Today, the Russian institutional investors, particularly pensions, tend to be quite conservative in terms of their allocations, and that adding and having a greater representation of risk capital would be quite important. So, and again, I think we can find numerous examples of countries which have done exactly this. All right, so let me end by, here we go, emphasizing a few thoughts. First of them is that while Russia has certainly got today many things that are, has many of the preconditions for an effective venture market, and we particularly highlight, the representation of PhDs, the strength of a scientific base and the like, it's clear that, despite those things, its venture market is lagging those seen in other BRIC countries. And that suggests that there is an important role for policymakers in this realm. It seems that the way in which the path to be most effective really involves focusing on the ecosystem and making sure that the ecosystem gets well developed, creating mechanisms to listen to the market and try to encourage market feedback, and then a process also of improvement and iteration to make sure that the efforts which are underway essentially respond in a sensitive kind of way to the market conditions.